Hello everybody, this is Yoko's Anime Reactions, and let us continue with our book readings. This is the start of the book reading, The Saint's Magic Power is Omnipotent, Volume 1, Prologue. One day, I was unexpectedly summoned to another world by the Saint summoning ritual. The hour was late. I had just returned home from work and was slipping off my shoes in the foyer when it happened. An incandescent white light suddenly spilled out around my feet. It was so blindingly bright that my eyes shut tight on instinct. When I dared to open them again, I was no longer in my familiar apartment kitchen, but a vast room built of stone. It worked! Ooh. I don't know what. Fuck, who says ooh? A crowd of people burst into cheers. I had no idea what to make of them and tried instead to understand my surroundings. In front of me stood two types of people, some dressed in surcoats who looked like knights, and others who wore long robes that brushed their ankles. The knights were in an uproar. They clapped one another on the back with a celebratory air. Meanwhile, the people in robes remained seated on the ground. They were all smiling faintly, as if they had just seen some kind of difficult task through to its end, and they did. I turned my attention to the floor. It was as black as the stone walls, but when I peered closely, I noticed that someone had drawn strange lines directly beneath where I sat. The lines connected to each other in a way that reminded me of a magic circle. To my right was one of those massive stone walls. To my left, however, was a girl. She was the only other person in this room dressed anything like me. Granted, I wore a full suit while she was wearing a more casual knitted top and a skirt. Nevertheless, we definitely looked like we came from the same modern era. Everyone else, though, with all that armor and all those robes, I almost wanted to ask if we had tripped into some kind of video game. Yeah, I can understand you thinking that. How many pages are in this thing? 161? Really? That's a lot shorter than a book one, that's for sure. The girl beside me seemed to be in her late teens, and she had a dazed look on her face. I suspected she and I had been brought here without warning in much the same way. Honestly, a part of me wanted to start screaming my head off. I desperately kept a grip on my alarm while I tried to comprehend our situation. Just as I was beginning to process what had happened to us, the doors on the left side of the room flung open and several people swept inside. In the lead was a devastatingly hot guy with crimson red hair whose attire made him look like a noble of the Rococo era, though without a wig. Oh, here comes the prince. Behind him was an equally hot black-haired knight, and yet another unfairly hot guy with navy blue hair brought up the rear. He was also dressed like a noble, though his finery was plainer than the red-haired guy's. At a guess, the handsome red-haired man was a prince, the gorgeous knight was his personal guard, and the beautiful third guy was some kind of official. But dude, if you keep dyeing your hair that bright shade of red, you're gonna be bald in the future. I don't think it's a dye job. I think it's actually, I'm assuming it's natural. As I tried to escape reality and my hot guy reverie, red-haired knelt before the younger girl beside me. With a wide smile on his face, he asked, "Are you the saint?" What in the world? Yeah, this is nuts. Act 1, the Research Institute of Medicinal Flora. It had been a month since my summoning. The warmth of spring was close at hand, and I was sowing herbs in the royal palace's garden. Why was this my responsibility? Because I now worked at the Research Institute of Medicinal Flora, which was located right next to this garden. In fact, I slept there too. Yep, that's right, I no longer resided in the royal palace. I lived in a research institute. The day Takanashi... Oh, yeah, her name is Sei, okay. Was summoned to another world by the saint summoning ritual, I learned it had been passed down since antiquity here in the kingdom of Salutania. I also learned that something called miasma was manifesting all across the kingdom. It always appeared relatively close to where people lived and had a detrimental effect on humans. Furthermore, though, the reasons were yet unclear. When the miasma reached a certain density, it churned out monsters. The more concentrated the miasma, the stronger the monsters. In turn, defeating monsters dissipated the miasma. As such, it was necessary to hunt and kill the unholy beasts to stop their source from gaining strength. Wait, am I even recording at this point? Hang on. Let me make sure, because I've done it before where I have messed up. Okay, good. I am. Alright, sorry about that. However, every few generations, the growing density of the miasma far exceeded the speed at which the monsters could be slain. Fortunately, during these eras, a maiden who would become the saint always appeared in the kingdom. The saint's magic was so powerful she could annihilate the miasma's monsters in the blink of an eye. In so doing, her magic instantly balanced the rate at which monsters were slain. That's the thing, though. I don't know if either girl is the saint at this point, if that's the case, because the saint's magic is supposed to be able to kill the monsters, right? As far as we know, the other girl can use healing magic, and Sei can use medicinal create medicinal potions, and that's about it. Versus the rate at which the miasma condensed. According to one theory, once the saint had appeared, the miasma could no longer condense at all, at least in her divine presence. Incredible, right? The saint was generally supposed to manifest all on her own, but at one point in ages past, despite the rapid growth of miasma, she had failed to appear. The sages of that time desperately experimented with all types of magic until they devised a ritual for summoning the maiden who would become the saint from a faraway land. And so, most annoyingly, the sages of the present era summoned me. The ritual itself had only been performed that one time long ago. The current sages hadn't known whether it would work until they actually tried it. Luckily for them, the sages of the past were as clever and powerful as they seemed, because the ritual did indeed manage to summon the saint. 2 of them, in fact. Up until now, there had only ever been one saint at a time. How did we wind up summoning 2 of them? The sages asked. Maybe it's because the present state of the miasma is so exceptionally dire we require another saint to drive it back. Maybe. The mystery remains unsolved. Anyway, that was all anyone had told me in the months since I had been brought by the saint summoning ritual. As for how I wound up living at the Research Institute of Medicinal Flora, well... After the ceremony, that red-haired lordling who swept into the room was unmistakably the crown prince of the kingdom. He didn't spare even a glance from me. His sole focus was the other girl, Ira Masono. It wasn't long before he swept out again, this time with Ira. Honestly, I wasn't too surprised. I was in my 20s, while dear Ira was in her late teens. She was obviously closer in age to the prince than I was. Not to mention, she had fluffy brown hair, perfect skin, rosy cheeks, doe eyes, and a certain soft sweetness that just made you want to protect her. I mean, like I said, they both could be the saint. Or a saint. Whereas I, who had just come off of multiple rounds of late-night overtime, had my hair up in a messy ponytail, unhealthy skin, thick glasses, and permanent dark circles under my eyes. Compared to Ira, I looked ridiculous. So I couldn't say I didn't understand why the prince only had eyes for Ira. But it was still pretty rude of him to summon someone without their permission and then just completely ignore their entire existence. On the other hand, the other people in the room were equally taken aback by how the prince blithely dismissed me. They were even more alarmed when they realized I was going to be left behind. They had no idea what to do with me. Really, I was even more bewildered, but it was pointless to just sit there. So I smiled at one of the robed guys, and I grabbed him by the collar and began to interrogate him. "I have a few questions, if you don't mind." "What would you like to know?" he croaked. Since I was taller than him, his weary grimace and panicked look made me feel like I was actually bullying him. Normally, I would have felt bad, but considering the situation, I couldn't be bothered with shame. "Where are we?" I asked. "This is the royal palace of the Kingdom of Salutania." Kingdom of Salutania? I had never heard of such a place. Given how many countries there are, it could have slipped through the cracks of my education, but a part of me knew that such rationalization was just attempts to escape my unnerving new reality. "I see. So why am I here?" "Well, The robe guy hesitated, but a stern look from me squeezed a frantic answer out of him. "We called you here using the saint summoning ritual." "The saint summoning what?" That was when they told me about the saint summoning ritual which I had previously described. "So, this is actually a different world from the one I was in before," I murmured. "Yes, I believe that's likely the case. Stuff like miasma and monsters simply weren't a thing in the world I came from. Although perhaps they actually were in my world and I just never found out about them? No, I doubt it." Excuse me. A small part of me hoped that was true. But the robe fellow quickly dispelled those hopes. He talked about these horrors as if they were a common, inescapable fact of reality here in the Kingdom of Salutania. No matter how much I didn't want to admit it, I had definitely been summoned to another world. "Okay," I breathed in and out. "I get that I was brought here by this saint summoning ritual, but how do I get back to my world?" My thinking was, if the saint appeared in order to balance the density of the miasma, maybe once everything was back to normal, the saint would no longer be needed. And then I could go home. More than likely, if this ends up getting resolved, you guys will not be able to leave, because if you guys leave, then things could get out of hand again, and then you guys would be needed again. And besides, I'd rather have, if something came along that could keep us safe, I'd rather keep them around. Better safe than sorry. But in a small, regretful voice, the man in robes simply said, "You cannot." With that, my hopes were extinguished. Yep, he ain't gonna be able to get home. He explained that this was only the second time the saint had been summoned from another world, and that the previous saint lived out the rest of her days in the kingdom. As of this moment, no one knew a way to return the saint to the world she came from. Great, I could never go home. That realization shocked me to my core. As if scrabbling for a distraction, my mind fixed on the red-haired prince's utterly tactless behavior. I decided then and there that I knew all I needed to know about this saint summoning and miasma monster business, and that I was going to get the heck out of this kingdom. First, I'd get out of this room, then the palace, then the capital, and then I'd make my way to whatever country was neighboring this one. Thinking back on it, I realized this plan was rather boneheaded, but at the moment I couldn't stand to be with these people a second longer. I released the robed man and marched out of the room. Everyone, from the robed guys to the knights, came chasing after me in a panic. "Lady Saint, where are you going?" "I'm leaving." "You mustn't. Please wait." For some reason, I thought I'd be able to just see my way out. But I quickly realized I was in a true palace. The hallways seemed endless, and I had absolutely no idea which way to go. I was pretty worked up at this point, so I just kept bullying down the halls no matter where they led. Eventually, though, a knight caught up to me and blocked my path. I glared at him, immediately peeved that somebody was trying to stop me. The knight grimaced in the same way the robed man had when I menaced him. He said, "Please wait a moment." I'm pretty sure I already spent plenty of moments in that room, especially if you factor in the moments I wasted talking with one of your robed guys. I realized that, but please, just one moment more. And that was crouching and using his massive body as a wall, as if trying to keep me in the palace no matter what it cost him. For some reason, his desperation made me calm down a bit. I nodded reluctantly. The knight melted in relief. "This way, please." To my chagrin, he led me away back into the depths of the palace. Then he left me in a room somewhere in that labyrinth, but not before saying, "Someone will be with you shortly." Once he was gone, a maid entered pushing a tea cart complete with a tea set. Despite my misgivings, the warm tea she poured soothed my irritation. For now, it was absolutely delicious, so I supposed you would expect from a place like this. With my newly clear head, I tried once more to process everything I had been through. Unfortunately, I couldn't quite concentrate. After the maid poured my tea, she didn't really talk to me or anything. She just stood close to the wall, though it seemed she was standing at the ready to attend to my needs. Maybe she assumed she was doing me a favor by leaving me to my thoughts? However, with nothing to do but spin my mental wheels, I wound up feeling wildly uncomfortable. Hang on, I'm turning my heater up. My freaking feet are cold. It's not warm enough, but then I turned it up one more, and it's too hot. Just like that, an hour went by. Back home in Japan, leaving an angry client stewing on their own for a whole hour would absolutely lead to a severed contract. Right as I was starting to fume again, someone finally knocked on the door. "Come in," I replied. At my invitation, the official-looking blue-haired man I had seen with the prince entered. While the tea was still quite good, and I was thankful to have had the time to compose my thoughts, the hour-long wait had pushed me right back to my limits. So of course I wound up glaring at him without even thinking. The guy flinched in surprise and wiped sweat from his brow, but he nevertheless dedicated himself to telling me even more about the kingdom and the circumstances I found myself in. According to the blue-haired man, the capital was surrounded by grasslands through which monsters freely roamed. Furthermore, it took no less than a week by coach to reach the neighboring kingdom, and there was a good chance of being assaulted by bandits along the way. For someone like me, who knew nothing about this world, it was pretty much trying to best in a possibly difficult video game. Great. Given all that, I was suddenly grateful for the knight who stopped me from leaving. I have heard that you expressed the desire to depart, but you cannot realistically live outside the royal palace. After everything this Miliquist toast official described, I was forced to agree. While I was pretty sure that I could eke out some kind of living in the royal capital, I doubted I'd ever recover the same sense of security that I had back in modern Japan. At the very least, so long as I was in the kingdom, I needed to maintain the same kind of vigilance I relied on when traveling abroad. If I'm going to be stuck in this world, I suppose I'll live in the royal palace for now. I'll get my bearings here first, and then, when I'm ready, I'll get out. I thought as I relented, I would follow this official's advice and live in the palace. Okay. After the official took his leave, the maid who had served me tea brought me to the chambers where I was to stay from now on. My new home was far bigger than my one-bedroom apartment back in Japan. It was more like a suite in a hotel, since it had a living room connected to 2 bedrooms. The interior design was done up in an extravagant Rococo style. It reminded me of those outlandishly expensive hotels in Europe that advertise themselves all over the internet. I collapsed on the sofa in the living room, thoroughly exhausted. The yellow light streaming through the window told me it was afternoon. But when I was summoned from Japan, it had been the dead of night. Not to mention, I had only just gotten home from work. I suppose there was a time difference between the Kingdom of Sultania and Japan. Seeing as I was running on empty from all those days in a row of killer overtime, not to mention the abrupt change in my entire world, I don't remember what happened after I collapsed. I assume I fell asleep. When I woke, I found myself on a luxurious bed. Someone must have carried me to it. By then, it was the following morning. I had also been stripped of my coat and business suit and stuffed into a white dressing gown. Hey, who the heck who changed my clothes? I'm hoping the maid. I hoped the culprit was the maid who brought me to this room, but I couldn't help feeling a bit, alarmed. I thought about putting on something else, but I was unsure if I had license to hunt around for more clothes without permission. I figured there might be someone in the living room, so I made my way there. When I opened the door, I found the same maid from yesterday waiting for me. Tentatively, I told her I wanted to put some more substantial clothes on. She guided me right back into the bedroom where various kinds of dresses hung in a closet. They were all way too gaudy for me, though. Not to mention they looked incredibly expensive. The type of clothes I'd be afraid to move in because I'd definitely get them dirty. Because I had no plans for going anywhere or doing anything, I asked for something modest and comfortable. The maid could only find one dress that matched my description, though you could probably still call it fancy. While I was changing, I nervously asked the maid if she'd been the one to change me out of my clothes the night before. She confirmed, so I thanked her sincerely. She responded, "It was my pleasure, milady." Honestly, I felt like she was being overly attentive, but I suspected pointing it out would only make her offer more profusely humble protestations, so I tried to stop worrying about it so much. I had already put up with quite enough of that fluff. And then, somehow, 2 weeks had gone by. All in all, I had way too much time on my hands. The first 3 days weren't so bad, since I was still freaking out about this whole summon to a new world thing, but the lack of anything productive to do quickly started getting to me. I had all the necessities of life, such as food, clothing, and shelter, but otherwise I was largely ignored. I saw neither hide nor hair of that blue-haired official after the first time he came to see me, even though I kept waiting for him to contact me. Whenever the maid was with me, we chatted a bit, but it was hard to keep a constant conversation going as she seemed to have other duties to attend to, so she didn't stay with me all day. Whenever she left, it was just me all alone in the room, and without a TV or a smartphone to keep me preoccupied, I was bored out of my mind. Yeah, I would be going crazy too if I were her. But it's not good to stay cooped up in your room all day. Unable to take it any longer, I made up my mind to go for a walk. I told the maid as much, and she insisted that she would accompany me. However, I would have felt bad making her come with me when I knew she had other responsibilities. Ultimately, I forced my way out on my own, saying I was just going to wander about the garden directly in front of my chambers. She was still pretty reluctant to let me go. I started with nosing around the aforementioned garden, but gradually, day by day, I expanded the scope of my exploration. During my wanderings, I came across an herb garden. Back in Japan, I had been really into herb and aromatherapy as a way to burn stress from work, so I was instantly intrigued by the garden. Some of the herbs looked similar to those that could be grown back home, which gave me hope that perhaps the plants weren't all that different in this world. Some of them, probably. That was when I heard a voice. I turned to find a handsome young man with an amiable smile. He had piercing emerald eyes and forest green hair to match. He introduced himself as one of the researchers at the Research Institute of Medicinal Flora, located next to the garden. "Do you have some business at the Institute today?" he asked me. "Oh, not in particular. I was just taking a walk when this garden caught my eye. I thought it looked interesting, so I came over." Upon hearing that, he seemed to take interest in me in turn, and he proceeded to tell me about the herbs they were growing. Lavender, rosemary, angelica. What the heck is angelica? The names were all the same in Japan, and when I pressed further, I learned they had more or less the same effects as well. "We use these herbs to make HP potions," he explained. "Did you just say HP potions?" I was shocked to hear him say that name of a game-type item like it was a real thing. These herbs have their own individual effects when dried and made into salves, or when boiled and drunk, but they're even more effective when used in potions. Huh? Is that so? At his research institute, they studied medicinal herbs, but it seemed his main focus was making potions, as he proved to be a veritable expert. While I listened to his descriptions of different kinds of potions, I found an intriguing parallel. The same herbs used in salves a long time ago in my world were being used as the ingredients for HP potions in this one. What's more, the effectiveness of potions was linked to the effects of the herbs used as ingredients. As I listened to this researcher's explanations, time passed without my noticing. Suddenly it was almost evening, and I knew I had to return to the palace. "Thank you very much," I said. "I truly enjoyed learning with you today." "Thank you for being a great listener. I do hope you'll stop by again sometime." Obviously, I took him up on his kind offer and made my way back to the herb garden the very next day. As I meandered, the researcher spotted me and once again joined me on my walk, telling me about the uses of the herbs growing in the immediate vicinity, as well as the effects of the potions that can be made from them. The third day I visited, we once more toured the herb garden, but on the fourth day he took me into the research institute himself, and I got to meet the other researchers. I enjoyed hearing everything they had to say as well. We mainly discussed medicinal plants and potions, but soon enough they started telling me about the latest trends in the capital and about the people working in the palace. It wasn't long before I found myself hanging around the institute every day, and it got to the point where traveling there and back to the palace was starting to become a real hassle. I mean, it took half an hour each way on foot to reach it. The palace's gardens were truly vast. According to my maid, everything in sight was part of the palace grounds. If only I didn't have to spend that whole hour traveling back and forth every day, I'd have even more time to spend with the researchers. "I'm starting to think I'd rather just live here," I said one day. "I think it's a great idea," said Jude. He was the researcher I had first met in the herb garden. We had grown quite friendly since my discovery of him and his research institute. He readily agreed with me when I admitted my thoughts. Actually, a bunch of the other researchers live here at the institute. As do I. Really? Yep, though some of us have estates in the capital as well. Even so, our institute is on one side of the palace, and the capital is on the other. Not to mention, we're so far away from the palace itself. Given all that distance since the first person decided to join us up and live here, more and more people have followed suit. Jude's family also resided in the capital, so for a while he commuted from his residence just like everyone else. However, once he realized a few of the researchers already lived in the institute, he promptly decided to move there as well. I really sympathized. I guess everyone felt the same about traveling all that way. Commuting is such a pain. Oh yeah. "What are you two talking about today?" I heard someone ask behind me. Jude and I turned to find Johann Valdick, the head researcher at the institute. "We were just chatting about what a slog it is for me to come here from the palace every day, and how nice it'd be if I could just live here," I said. "Here at the institute?" "Well, yes, I heard some of the researchers already do. Is that alright?" "Or is that right? They do indeed. Wait, does that mean you want to work here now too?" Johann grinned. His words took me by surprise. Work at the institute? I suppose it was true that people living there were all researchers. It might be weird for someone not similarly employed to take up residence among them. Not to mention, it was clear to me that if I were to move out of the palace and into the capital, it would be far better to have a job than remain unemployed. Also, working at the institute would be way more exciting than wasting day after day bored to tears in the palace. Plus, it would mean working with herbs, which I already had a fascination with. I could study potions too, which I knew nothing about. I started to feel genuinely enthused about the prospect. "Yeah, working at the research institute's a great idea," I thought, and with that I turned to the head researcher. "That's right, I want to become a researcher." "Oh, really? Then we'll need to proceed along the formal channels," Johann said in a somewhat teasing manner, but he still made his way back to his office, albeit somewhat slowly. Later, once I was formally employed, Johann told me with some surprise that at the time, he was positive Jude told me with some surprise that at the time he thought Johann was joking. But I had made up my mind. That very day, as soon as I got back to my chambers in the palace, I asked my maid to act as an intermediary. I needed to ask the blue-haired official about my prospective employment. By then, it was already evening, so I had to wait until the next day to meet him. The official stopped by after breakfast while I was taking a tea break. I heard there was something he wished to discuss. "That's correct. So, you see, I have an interest in herbs, and I would like to work at the Research Institute of Medicinal Flora." "Very well, then." "Huh? Just like that?" I thought he was going to need way more convincing to give his consent, but it turned out that Johann had already made my case. An agreement had been made that I would move to the institute from the palace. Up to that point, I was half convinced Johann's suggestion was merely in jest, but it seemed like he had really done the work to get the approval of the blue-haired official guy. Good going, Johann. Hang on. Dang it. I immediately set out making preparations for my move. I didn't have much, just the business suit, coat, shoes, and a purse I had brought home from work when I was summoned. However, it wasn't like I could work in a research institute with a single suit. I needed more clothes and other daily necessities. The official said he would arrange for those, though, so I left it to him. In the end, he prepared a few sets of plain shirts, skirts, and dresses that wouldn't look out of place in the research institute, as well as a collection of personal items such as towels and soaps. Including, among my new belongings, were the dresses and accessories I had taken a liking to during my brief time living in the palace, as well as several new ones with similar designs. The official must have taken my preferences into consideration. I suspected the official had even prepared the furniture I found already furnishing my new chambers on the 3rd floor of the Institute. It all matched and had a bright, welcoming tone. It looked like my new home would be a pleasant place to spend time in, not at all how I'd imagined living in such a place would be. "Thank you so much for all your help," I said to him on the day of my move. His final preparation for me was a carriage that would ride to the Institute. "Don't mention it. Please feel free to let me know if there's anything else you need," he replied, wearing his usual tired, somewhat nervous smile. "I will, thank you. I had absolutely zero intention of ever returning to the palace, so I thought it unlikely I'd be asking him for help ever again." Still, I thanked him again anyway before getting in the carriage. And so, I was employed as a researcher at the Research Institute of Medicinal Flora, and I even had a room there to call my own. Act 2! I'm only on episode 2, though. Potions. He who does not work, neither shall he eat. Before I knew it, I was an official employee of the Research Institute of Medicinal Flora. At first, it felt a bit presumptuous, making my hobby into a job, but thinking back on it, I definitely made the right choice. Indeed, my recruitment had been a bit hush-hush, because on my first day, Johann, the head researcher, gathered everyone around to inform them that I had been hired. At Johann's urging, I greeted my new coworkers. "My name is Say, and starting today, I'll be working here with you all. I look forward to our collaboration." For some reason, everyone looked flabbergasted. Even though I was acquainted with most of the researchers already, this news seemed to hit them like a bolt from the blue. As a result, my greeting felt kind of flat. There was an audible pause before a wave of murmurs broke out through the room. "I suppose in the meantime we'll put Jude in charge of you," Johann said in a slightly raised voice that suppressed the whispers. "Huh? Me?" Jude asked in surprise. I was honestly relieved that the person I was most closely acquainted with would be the one in charge of my training. Back in Japan, there were plenty of times where I had to work with someone I didn't know all that well, so if I had to, I was sure I'd be able to stick it out here too. But it's so much better to get to work with someone you already know, especially one you get along with well. I bet Johann took the hint into consideration when he assigned Jude to me. "I'm looking forward to collaborating with you." I gave my formal greeting to Jude again. "Me too." Jude might have been surprised, but his smile seemed genuine when he said that. Okay, I'm gonna stop this here. I hope you guys are excited for more, and I'll see you guys next time.